Hi, my name is Sean Zenz. I'm a sales engineer here at Enable, and today we're going to go through an N-Central 7.2 tech demo. Now, the first thing we're going to go through is the architecture of N-Central. Now, N-Central can be consumed or had in two different ways. N-Central can be an on-site option, so basically a server can be dedicated to an N-Central install, or it can be virtualized. N-Central comes with its own operating system. It doesn't require a Microsoft license or anything like that. It has an embedded operating system in the image that you download, and you install that on blank hardware. The second option is to have us host it for you. So basically you access it in the exact same fashion through a web browser, log in to manage, remotely control, monitor all your clients. Now, how N-Central works on the customer site is all software based. There are no hardware appliances or anything like that at the customer level. What we have is something called a Windows probe. A probe is a piece of software that gets installed on a Windows server within one of your customer environments. And the point of that probe is to go out, scan the network, and discover anything that has an IP address within that customer environment. It will automatically classify those devices through various different methods, including WMI, SNMP, etc. And when it finds something like a, say for example, Windows laptop, it automatically installs a Windows agent on that machine. What that Windows agent does is when that device roams or leaves the network, that Windows agent has the capability to communicate directly back to N-Central. Now, part of this network discovery, as I said, it classifies that device. It also applies best practice monitoring to that device. So if it discovers something like for example, a firewall with SNMP enabled, it will automatically apply traffic monitoring to that device. Now, out of the box notifications are already set up in N-Central, so that if a problem is detected on a Windows server, for example, that will automatically send an email to a technician. Now, there's escalation built in, there's repeating built in, and more importantly, there's actually a link for remote control within a email notification. Within N-Central, there are various different means of remote control. One of those being what's called the Remote Support Manager, which is a behind-the-screen remote control method. So the capability to do things like a regedit or a command prompt without interfering with a currently logged in user. There's also other methods built in, like for example a VNC for connecting to anything that runs VNC, RDP for Windows, SSH Telnet for network devices and Linux devices, as well as something like opening up a web page on, say for example a firewall or a printer within that customer network. Now, all this communication between N-Central and the customer site is all secure. It's all done on outbound port 443. Now, that being said, our software does not require any sort of VPNs. So for me to click a button in N-Central to connect to a printer, I'm actually doing that through the probe technology on my customer site. There's no need for any open ports inbound. It's all outbound only. Now, after I've done my remote control, I've remediated my issues, I have the capability to say run report. We have built-in reports within N-Central. These reports can be exported, they can be rebranded, they can be scheduled, they can be direct emailed to a customer if you wish, and that's all part of the N-Central reports. And the last piece I'll mention here when it comes to architecture in N-Central is PSA integration. So we integrate with ticketing tools such as TigerPot or Autotask, so that when a problem is detected on a customer site, that can automatically open a ticket within that those ticketing tools, basically. Now, what we're going to do next here is we're going to jump right into the N-Central software itself. Now, here you can see the login page for N-Central. Everything here can be rebranded. You can put your own company logos anywhere you see Enable or N-Central, as well as change all this text to include, for example, your technical support information. The reason why you would rebrand the N-Central console is maybe you want to grant access to one of your customers to log in. You can give them the capability to be a read-only user, so they can log in, they can view dashboards, they can view statuses, but they can't ultimately make any changes or change anything about N-Central. Now, when I log in here into N-Central, the first thing I'm presented with is what's called the NOC view. The NOC view where all the issues across all your clients get filtered into one view. Right now I'm saying in my filter, because it saves what my last filter was, I'm saying show me customer International Data Warehouse and Pineview Hotels, Windows servers that are in a warning state only. And here you can see I have 12 issues across those 2 customers for warning states on servers. Now you can see here that I also have the capability to do things like filter based on notification. So N-Central sent me an email, or sent my technician an email. I can go in here and I can acknowledge the problem. And what that means is, as a technician, I can do things like suppress escalations if I have those set up. You can see here I can also filter based on endpoint security. So built right into N-Central, and that's represented here as this little red and white shield, is an AV solution. Now that literally gets deployed with a checkbox within our UI that will install an antivirus. It will attempt to uninstall the current AV solution, and everything is configured about that solution right through the N-Central console. There's no reason to ever configure it at a server or desktop level. It's all global management. You can see here that I also have a button here for ticketing. So I've integrated N-Central with Autotask, and I have the capability to create a ticket right off of problems off of my knock view. I can also configure it, for example, that say for example something returns to normal or corrects itself, it can automatically close that ticket within Autotask. Now, how we represent customers is over here on the left. So similar to a Windows Explorer where I would expand or collapse, you can see here I can expand International Data Warehouse, and I can go ahead and I can look at all workstations in International Data Warehouse. And here you can see I have 2 workstations right now. What this is telling me that on my 2 workstations, one of them I've got a CPU spike, and the other one is missing some patches, for example. Now, how my software got to this customer site, I have a few different methodologies for that. And the first one being here, I can go ahead and I can download the Windows Probe as I mentioned, and I can go ahead and I can scan the network. Now, say for example you don't have a server. Maybe you just have an environment where you have, say, 1 laptop or a couple laptops. There is no place to put a probe in this case. Well, what you can do is you can install this Windows agent manually on one of those devices. If I want to, I can right-click, I can copy this link, and I can even email them a link to download the software. You can see that it pre-populates the customer name. So what that means is that has all the details for this customer, including my N-Central server. So they'll never be asked for any sort of activation key, IP addressing, anything like that. They can go ahead, they can install this agent, or you can install it for them, and they'll just appear if they're a workstation in the workstations folder in N-Central. Now you can also see on my software download page here that I also have agents for Linux and Mac. So we support both those environments. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at what's called the all device view. The all device view is all my devices within, in this case, International Data Warehouse. So you can see here that I have 23 devices, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick on one of these Windows 7 workstations. So here you can see I have a Windows 7 workstation, and on this device I'm doing a few different things. You can see that I'm monitoring, call it maybe 13, 14 different things on this device. And with the exception of a CPU spike, everything's fine. There's no problems with this device. That being said, N-Central is not a simple yes-no type of monitoring. Each one of these services has thresholds pre-configured. So if I go ahead and I click on something like memory here, you can see that first thing it tells me is I have a gig of memory, but more importantly I'm using 43% of that right now. Well, 43% is a green check mark, and it's a green check mark because it falls well within our normal threshold. These thresholds are automatically set out of the box, so that when you roll N-Central out to a new customer site, you don't have to change any of these. They're already pre-configured. That being said, N-Central can always be customized. So, for example, here, maybe I think 85% is too high. Maybe I want that to be 60%. I can go ahead and I can click on thresholds. I can switch that over to a custom value, and I can put in my custom thresholds at this point. I can take this threshold, I can tie it into what's called a template, so I can then apply this to multiple devices if I wanted to. But more importantly, I can have it just on this device if I'd like. If I've got a SQL server that runs high in memory and I know that, I can adjust that SQL server if I want. Now, also on this device, you can see I'm doing things like endpoint security. Like I said, endpoint security is literally a checkbox in N-central. Here you can see on my Properties tab, I have endpoint security. It's enabled and it's deployed on this machine. Now, how I configure the endpoint security is done through what's called a profile. So as I mentioned, everything is through one console. If I want to edit or change anything about my profile, I can go ahead and click View Edit. Here you can see this is the name of my profile, and this is what I have configured. Now, being that I've applied this to a workstation, the only thing that pertains in my example are these workstation settings. But you can see I also have support for Exchange server protection or Exchange level protection, as well as Windows servers. Now, I have this applied to a workstation. You can see I'm doing anti-spam on my workstation. I'm doing antivirus. I'm doing content filtering, as well as what's called TruePrevent, which is a software firewall. Now, if I want to change anything about my antivirus, for example, I can go ahead and I can click on Edit Settings. Right now, I'm scanning compressed files, but I'm not scanning network drives. Well, maybe I want to. I can go ahead and check that, hit Save, and that'll automatically update on any machine that is using this profile. You can see also on this device, I'm choosing what happens when a threat is detected. Does it automatically disinfect? Does it say delete the file? If it can't disinfect, what does it do then? Does it move to quarantine, or does it again delete the file? Quarantine is actually centrally managed in N-central, so that when a threat is detected on a machine, it gets quarantined locally on that machine, and then it communicates back to N-central what the file was called, as well as what type of threat it believes it is. I can then, through the quarantine management that's built in, restore or delete that file based on whatever type of file it was. You can see here I also have things like desktop warnings. So I'm managing antivirus for my customer. Well, maybe that customer doesn't want a pop-up when a virus is detected. Maybe they just want me to take care of it. Well, I can go ahead and I can disable any sort of desktop warning on demand. File types to scan. I can include extensions. I can exclude files or folders if I want to. It's all part of my profile. And I also have heuristics. Now, the idea behind heuristics is, say for example a new virus comes out. It's been out for 5 hours, and there's no signature updates for it yet. Well, what heuristics does for me is it examines the behavior of a file and determines whether or not that's a threat. And endpoint security will make that judgment based on the sensitivity that you set, and choose whether it wants to quarantine or delete that file or attempt to disinfect that. Now, endpoint security includes antivirus, anti-spam, anti-spyware, malware detection, rootkit detection as all part of the suite that gets deployed with that checkbox. Now, also my Windows 7 device here, you can see I'm doing patch management. So how patch management works on N-central, there's two methodologies, or two ways that it works. The first one being that we integrate with the Windows Update Agent itself running on that Windows device. And the second way is we actually integrate with WSUS servers. So if you have a WSUS deployed to a customer site, when N-central detects it and installs an agent on it, it'll actually bring that device in the UI and it'll place it in the patch management WSUS servers. What I can do here is I can actually configure those servers remotely. So I can enable or disable that functionality in N-central. I can configure the WSUS options. That includes things like, for example, do I store updates locally? And more importantly, what am I storing locally? And I can even make it available at another level. And what that means is, say for example, I have a WSUS server in my site, the MSP level. And I want to use that server to do patching for multiple customers externally. So I can actually make that available like I have right now at the global level, or what's called the SO, or Service Organization. Now, what my patch profile does for me is it basically tells my device what behavior it follows. So here you can see back on my Windows 7 device that my profile is telling it to automatically download and schedule the installation every day at 9 o'clock. If I want to change it, I can say, perhaps maybe I want to do that Saturdays at 2 o'clock in the afternoon because that's my maintenance window. Most important down here is, where am I getting my Windows updates from? Am I getting it from that WSUS server that I have globally? Am I getting it from the SUS server internal to that customer site? Or what if there is no SUS server? Like I said, we can talk right to the Windows Update agent itself, and we can tell that update agent to follow these criteria I've set, but go to Windows Update instead. So that's going to go to Windows Update. It'll download everything and install everything at the scheduled time. If I want that individual patch by patch approval, that's exactly where WSUS comes into play. So I can go ahead, I can do a patch management, deploy patches. This will pull a list from all my SUS servers into the UI of all the patches that I can deploy. Here, for example, maybe I want to deploy this Outlook 2007. And this will go ahead and it'll tell me whether or not it's needed across my customers and which devices it's needed for. I'm going to check this. I'm going to say approve patches. Now the first option I have here is, am I doing this for install, remove, or declining the patch so it doesn't get installed. So if I've installed a patch across all my customer sites, and maybe it's not playing well with a SQL server or all the SQL servers, I can go ahead and I can approve for removal across the globe. Now I'm going to do an install here. It's going to pull in a list of all my customers I'm doing patch management for, and what I'm going to say here is I'm going to approve patches for my Windows workstations on International Data Warehouse, as well as my Windows workstations on Pineview Hotels, the other customer I have here in the UI. Next, I can set a installation deadline. What that means is, well, maybe my device missed its maintenance window. I told it to do its update 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday, but the device wasn't turned on, or something happened where it couldn't connect to the internet. Well, what a deadline means is, do I want to wait for next Saturday to install that patch, or do I need this patch installed now? I can set this deadline and say, if it didn't install on Saturday, well, maybe I want to install Tuesday afternoon. Or if I have a patch that I need to deploy globally right now, I can go ahead and I can set this deadline to 5 minutes ago, and it'll approve this patch and install it across the board right now. The last bit, of course, is just confirm my actions. That's how our patch management works for deploying patches, but what we also have is a capability to do what's called automatic approvals. So now that I have a WSUS server, maybe I have multiple WSUS servers, I have a global Windows Update server. Well, what I can do is I can create rules that automatically deploys patches for me according to when my maintenance windows were in my patch profiles. So here I can add a new rule. I can call it whatever I need to call it, and I'm going to say automatically approve critical updates. And where I'm going to do this, I'm going to automatically approve critical updates to everything in my example. And again, as I just described, I have a patch deadline. I can save this. It'll automatically come into play. It will follow the same maintenance windows I've specified, unless, of course, I've set that deadline. So what we're going to do next here is we're going to head back down to that Windows 7 device I've been talking about. And as you can see right here, I'm doing some basic utilization. I'm monitoring some Windows services, Windows event logs. Now if I want to add any more monitoring to my machine, I can simply click Add. Now what these are called are services in our UI. And we have about 200 different unique services. Each one of these, as I mentioned, has thresholds pre-configured, so I can simply apply it to a device. So far what I've been showing you, patch management, endpoint security, is a lot of proactive, maintenance and stuff like that. Here you can see, for example, that N-Central can do more than just monitor if something is working, but it actually do what's called self-healing. So if I click on this Windows service, right now it's telling me that certificate propagation is started, its start mode is manual, and the service is okay right now. But what if this stops working? Well, I want N-Central to not just tell me about it, I want to do something about it. So I can click on self-healing, and I can say that if this Windows service fails First thing it does, scan it again. What that'll do for me is it's going to validate the problem. It's going to eliminate any false positive. It's going to make sure that nothing on this device is automatically restarting it already. Maybe it's a server and you've configured a rule to automatically restart. Well, this scanning the service multiple times is it'll get around that basically. My next option here is to execute a self-healing action. Now, certificate propagation has failed. I want to automatically restart certificate propagation. And there we go. Down here at the bottom, I pick and choose what happens when it restarts for me. Do I get an email saying self-healing happened, and it was successful, or do I only care when self-healing couldn't correct the problem for me? Either way, I have a built-in report within N-Central that'll collect all my self-healing details. It'll hold it for 3 months worth of data retention, and I'll be able to run that report whenever I need to. Now, my example here, restarting a Windows service, is pretty straightforward. What if I'm monitoring a disk though? Say I'm monitoring the C drive. Now, I want to know if it goes into a warning or a failed state for utilization. It's becoming full. Well, what I can do here, instead of restarting a Windows service, I'm going to execute a script. And in this case, I'm going to execute a script that deletes temporary Windows files for me. Now, as you can see here, I'm going to invoke a VBS script. We support VBS, Bash, and PowerShell scripting in N-Central. And if I want to see what this script is doing beyond just the description, I can go ahead and I can download this script, I can edit it, I can re-upload it if I want to. I also have the capability to upload my own script at any point. I can store a script in N-Central, I can use it on a one-off basis, I can download new scripts from what we call the Enabler Resource Center, basically the online community, and I can utilize those scripts within the UI. So it's going to go ahead, it's going to run my delete temp file script if my hard drive gets into a warning or a failed state, and as I mentioned, thresholds are already set up for that. And after it's run that script, it's going to check, it'll wait some time, check the service, see if it's resolved the problem, and then I can choose, of course, what type of email am I getting. Maybe it ran that delete temp file script and it freed up 5%, it's not a problem anymore. Or maybe it ran the script and it only freed up 1%. And in that case, it still emails my technician. And in my self-healing report, it says that it self-healed it. Now, on my device here, on my Windows 7 device, I have an Asset tab. This will show me all the asset information about my device. You can see here, for example, it's a virtual machine. It also includes things like license key. So we have the capability to pull license keys off of the operating system as well as Microsoft software. It'll tell me what type of license it is, but most importantly, there's a built-in report that collects all these license keys into an inventory report. Also here you can see I have a Notes tab. This is going to date stamp and author any information about my device. If I'm integrating it with something like an auto task like I've done, it'll also put in tickets, ticket numbers when I close tickets off this device. I also have a System Change tab. System Change will show me all the asset information on my device and even allow me to say notify if asset information changes. So if I'm monitoring a Windows server and all of a sudden one of the NICs goes missing out of it, someone pulls it out, N-Central detects that hardware change and emails me about it. What we're going to do next here is we're going to do remote control. You can see here that I have this blue icon up top, basically this blue button that I can launch remote control from. Anywhere I see this little blue icon in my UI, whether it was on the NOC view, whether it was on the all device view, whether it's in multiple other views I have, I can launch remote control directly from that button. Here you can see my connection type is going to be the remote support manager or that behind the screen remote control. But I also have the capability to do things like a VNC, an RDP, Telnet, SSH, even open up a web console on a network device. I'll go ahead and I'll launch this remote control here. You can see it downloads a little Java file and it counts down to my connection. Now, how our remote control works, the technology behind it, is we actually try multiple different methods to establish remote control. We use secure HTTP connection. We use a reverse SSH tunneling, as well as we do a peer-to-peer connection for the fastest possible remote control. What I'll do here, I'll throw in my credentials for this machine, and I'll get connected to basically the admin console for my machine now. Now that I'm connected to this Windows 7 machine, the first thing I'm presented with is an overview of this device. So here I have some system information, but most importantly I have this real-time CPU and memory load. So I can see exactly what I'm doing and how it's affecting a currently logged in user potentially. Now, like I said before, there's a bunch of options. There's a lot in here I can do without interacting with a logged in user. And one of those being a file transfer. Here I can bring up a side-by-side Windows Explorer between my local laptop and that remote VM, where I can copy files back and forth, I can delete files, I can synchronize folders if I want to, all within my remote support manager. If I want to chat with someone, say for example I just want to pop up a little chat box in that logged in user, it'll bring up a little box. I can chat back and forth with anyone who's logged in. I also have the capability here to do things like a file manager, basically in my computer view. Drill into a drive, change permissions on a folder, delete files is completely up to me. Windows event logs. N-Central has a capability to monitor all these Windows event logs for us, but we can also just log in and take a look if we want to. Say for example I want to know if I'm getting a event ID of a 7036. If that fails, well, I want N-Central to send me an email about that, and I have that capability. Services, start stopping services, processes. I can go ahead and I can take a look at all the processes that are running. And if I double click one of these processes, like this for example VMware Tools, I can go ahead and I can end this process if I'd like. I can look at DLLs in use, open files in use, registry keys in use, and even edit a registry key on demand. I can change the value right now. And this of course does not interrupt a logged in user. In fact, they don't even know I'm connected right now. I also have the capability on the fly to do things like a command prompt. It's the same black background and white text, and I can do any of the same commands in here. I can reboot a device on demand. I can even change some of the simplest things. If I need to change someone's time on the fly, I can click on time, I can change it, and automatically in the bottom right corner, their time changes. I can look at things, for example, like partition information. So I can see how many partitions there are, how it is partitioned on my machine. I can even look at things like open ports. So maybe I want to take a look and see what application is communicating on what port. Or, maybe this laptop got stolen. The remote support manager and the agent do not notify when I've connected. There's no tray icon, it's simply behind the screen, so that I can even identify what the public IP address is of this device should it be connected to the internet again. I've got installed applications in here, and if it's got a uninstall string, I can even plug that into command prompt. Now, being that it's called Remote Support Manager, I can of course do remote control. By default, it is a shared mouse session, so I can interact with a currently logged in user. But of course, I have the capability, if I'd like to, even lock out a user or blank out a screen. So if I'm connecting to a user and they insist on moving their mouse, they insist on typing when I'm trying to do something, well, I can go ahead and I can lock out that user temporarily. Or maybe I'm connected to a user and I don't want them to see what I'm doing. Maybe I'm applying some sort of fix on their machine, and the last thing I want them to do is sit there and watch what I'm doing and try to recreate or redo this fix on their own. Well, I can go ahead and I can blank out their screen temporarily, and this is all under my remote control options in the Remote Support Manager. And of course, I also have the capability to ask for permission. Now, perhaps my end user does not want me to have the capability to click remote control to get to their desktop. They want to be prompted for a confirmation, a yes or no, before I can connect to that logged in user. And I can go ahead and I can prompt them through the console. Now this is the Remote Support Manager, and as you can see there are tons of options in here, and I can spend all day talking about it. But what we're going to do here is we're going to move on to other features within N-Central. When I click Connected in the N-Central UI, it asks me, do I want to disconnect the session or add a new connection? That's important because if I have multiple technicians, I can have multiple technicians connect to one machine. In this case, of course, I will disconnect. And what we'll do next here is we're going to take a look at what's called a service template. So in my UI, you can see that I've got, like I said before, about 23 devices, and I'm going to pick on one of these Windows servers here. So here I've got a SQL 2008 server, and on this SQL server you can see I'm monitoring maybe 25 different things. But most importantly, I'm monitoring the SQL service itself. Now for me to add monitoring to a device, as I mentioned before, I can simply click Add. But what we do is we group a lot of these services together into what's called a template, so I can apply a group of services that are best practice. So here, for example, you can see I have the SQL Server 2008 service template, which includes a bunch of individual services customized, both thresholds and what I'm monitoring, to monitor SQL 2008. So that I do not have to be SQL 2008 monitoring expert to start monitoring it. We already have that created in the UI. If I want to apply anything new to this device, I can hit Apply New Service Template. And I can go ahead and, maybe this server is also my domain controller. So I can apply my Active Directory service template. And maybe it's a Bez server or BlackBerry server. And it has Exchange 2007. And maybe it's got Kaspersky. So I can go ahead and I can check these boxes and I can apply service templates. This will apply best practice monitoring to my device on the fly. Now, as I mentioned before, I can customize my thresholds, I can set up self-healing, I can add individual services on demand, so of course I can create my own service templates. So any effort I put into this device, any customizing I do is never lost. I can always take that effort I put into it, create a service template, and now apply this to multiple devices. So here I have all my SQL monitoring. Maybe I've done self-healing, maybe I've done custom thresholds, I've added above and beyond what we had set up. Well, of course I want that to be available to other customers. So whenever I have a SQL 2008 server, I can simply apply my best practice SQL 2008 monitoring to it. So I can name it and apply it to a new customer, for example. Now, what we're going to take a look at here next is the monitoring for a network device. So here you can see in my UI, I've got a PIX. On my PIX, this is being monitored by the Windows probe. Of course, I cannot install an agent on a network device. So my Windows probe, which is sitting on a Windows server, is monitoring it in many different ways, and one of those including SNMP. Here you can see I'm getting connectivity from this device. The Windows probe is pinging this PIX and letting me know if it's responding. Now that's pinging the internal interface, and of course I can also monitor the external interface from the Incentral server itself to make sure it's accessible from both ways. Also here I'm monitoring in SNMP traps or syslog information. So my Windows probe acts as a syslog server. It'll collect traps and it'll send me an email if there's any problems. Interface health. Any discard packets, error packets, if I have an interface enabled but I have nothing plugged into it, it's going to tell me about it. And of course, traffic. So I want to know what the traffic is on the, say, outside interface in this case. Here's all my values, but more importantly, I want to run a report on the fly. So I'm going to take a look at traffic over the last 12 hours. I could go back 3 months if I wanted to. And I'm going to take this report, I'm going to export it into a PDF, and I go ahead and I'll open it in Reader. So here I have my traffic utilization, last 12 hours, International Data Warehouse for my PIX, and here's my report. So you can see, for example, that I had a bunch of spiking over the last 12 hours. This report can be scheduled, it can be emailed, it can be exported as I've done, all through the Incentral console on demand. Now, as I mentioned before, anything that has an IP address I can remotely connect to. So if I wanted to connect to something like, say, my backup server here, I can do Remote Support Manager. I could connect via SSH if I wanted to a Linux server. I can open up a web console even on a network device. It's all done through either the agent or the probe technology within Incentral UI. So what we're going to take a look at next is what we call management tasks. So what a management task is basically where I can do my proactive maintenance and stuff like that. So here you can see I can add a task, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a software distribution. Software distribution means install a piece of software on my Windows device within that customer network. I can upload a piece of software into Incentral, and I'll use Spybot as my example. I can upload the latest build of Spybot, spybot.exe, and I can put in my switches. In my case here, I'm doing a very silent install for Spybot, and I'm excluding things like T-timers. I don't want that installed. Here's where I put in all my switches and my command line perimeters, and now I can choose where it's getting installed and when it's getting installed. I want that installation to happen now, and I want that installation to happen on these devices. And I can go ahead and I can execute that command. Now you can see I have notification details, meaning that I can choose a email recipient to say whether or not it succeeded or failing in installing that software. Next, we're going to take a look here at file transfer. So file transfer allows me to basically take a file from my Incentral server, whether I upload it or I store it there, and put it on any location within my Windows devices. So maybe I want to put say a support.url or a shortcut to write an email on every user's desktop or all users' desktop here in my remote location. I can upload my support.url. I can even overwrite it should I be continuously putting new versions on the desktop of my users. And I can choose when it happens and who it happens to. In this case, I want it to happen to everyone. And I'm going to have that execute now. And down here at the bottom, of course, success or failure of that action. I also have the capability to do endpoint security scanning. So our antivirus, of course, does real-time scanning, but I have the capability to do full scans as well and schedule these full scans. So here I can choose the actions to take, what is it looking for during my full scan, is it disinfecting, is it quarantine, is it deleting, etc. Down here at the bottom, how often does this happen? I want this to happen every Sunday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I want this to happen at, say, 1 o'clock in the morning. I can go ahead and I can choose the devices that have endpoint security on them, or maybe I just want half of them, the other half are going to have their own schedule. And of course, notify success or failure. And the last piece here, when it comes to my management tasks, is scripting. Here I can take basically a task like a defrag, and I can schedule that. So I'll go ahead and I'll choose my defrag script. Defrag is part of my scheduled maintenance, so I can go ahead and I can automate that process. You can see I'm invoking a batch script. I can download again and edit this batch script on demand, or upload my own script. You can see in my command line perimeters I'm doing the C drive, but I can append to that, I can change that on demand. I'm going to schedule this to say that I want to defrag every Sunday at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm going to do that on, maybe not all my devices, maybe I'm just going to do that on my Windows servers. So I can skew my devices, and now I can apply that to just my Windows servers. So defrag Sunday, 2 o'clock in the morning. These are what we call management tasks. I also have the capability through a management task to do something like a WSUS cleanup as part of a script to delete old updates and stuff like that. Now, what we're going to take a look at next here is some of the reports. I've gone through the UI and I've shown some reports, but there's a bunch of reports I haven't mentioned yet. One of those being a asset site report. Asset site report takes all the asset information across the customer site and groups it into one single report. So if I want to take a look and see, who is the manufacturer of my devices. There, for example, is my laptop. You can see it's manufactured by Lenovo. And as I mentioned, my lab, I've got a bunch of VMware devices in there. This will also do things like group based on how much memory they have. If I have devices that have less than 512, it's going to tell me about that. I have the capability here to run reports like a license compliance report. That will go across my network. It'll find all the installs, and I can plug in how many license keys I have for my software installs. Availability reporting. I can run a report on demand that shows something simple like, maybe my Exchange SLA. I want a report that proves that Exchange has been up greater than 95%, and I can run the report through N-central. I also here have endpoint security threat reports, as I mentioned. I have an executive summary, that is a utilization type report, where I can see things like CPU, disk, memory, traffic utilization on my network devices, and availability, for example. So I can show on a server that perhaps I'm monitoring 20 things, and those 20 things have been up or available 100% over the last month. I also have in here things like an incident summary. So this will show me all the problems, notifications sent, obviously who's getting emails from N-central, remote control summary, who's doing remote control, what is being self-healed, what appears in the Windows event logs. And of course I also have patch reporting. So what is the patch status across my devices, who's missing patches, who doesn't have patches, who's got patches, etc. I also have the capability to launch what I call Encompass. Now Encompass is a piece of software that gets installed on a SQL server. And basically how Encompass works is if you're running an N-central server in-house, on its dedicated hardware or VM, it can export its data into a SQL database, and Encompass runs on top of this SQL database and lets me pull information out of the SQL database. What's important about this Encompass tool is that Encompass can store information for 7 years. So if you have customers in a medical vertical, that could get audited and they need information stored for a couple years or 7 years or whatever the case may be, Encompass will do that for me. It also gives me the ability to run additional reports that are not out of the box, as well as create completely custom reports using the Microsoft Report Builder, which again runs on top of SQL. There's a couple reports I'm going to highlight when it comes to my Encompass reports, and one of those being a hardware inventory report. So what this allows me to do is take all my asset information, exclude and include information I care about. So N-central has the capability to monitor things like system warranty and lease expiries. You can put in those dates within the asset tab on each one of my devices. Well, I can include that information into a report if I'd like. So I can go ahead and I can run a report to see when all my leases are expiring on my devices. I also have the capability here to run a report like a, say for example, a capacity planning report. Here it's taking all my devices and it's going to show me the devices that are overutilized. And the key piece to this is also going to flag them. So sure, 93% is a high number, well it's also red. So when I present this to a customer, they can visually identify that it looks like there's something wrong with that device. And the reality is there is. It's being overutilized. It's a potentially a hardware upgrade opportunity for you, and you can present that in a report. This, of course, breaks down individual details about a device, and these details can be included for 7 years, should that device be around for 7 years. And the last report I'll show you here, when it comes to Encompass, is what we call the Executive Summary Report. So this report is a basically a summary, high-level summary across a network. So here you can see the first thing I get is a overall score. It'll give me a grade on all these different criteria, and of course I can pick and choose how each one of these gets weighted, as well as what gets included. So maybe I don't want data protection as part of my report. I don't have to include it. First thing it does for me is includes how many devices are managed and how many are unmanaged. What that means is, say you have a contract with a customer of yours, and that includes monitoring their servers, but it doesn't include their workstations. Well, I can go ahead and I can generate a report that shows that maybe half the network is under management, but this other half is in this gray area that I know nothing about. So if there's problems, etc., I won't be able to proactively detect them. They'll always be calling me whenever there's an issue. So you can get them into that ideal 100% IT coverage. I also here have incident details, which devices generate the most problems. There's also an Encompass report called a downtime cost impact, which translates 109 problems from my desktop into how much that actually costs them. Aside from just service calls, someone was standing around 109 times. Well, what did that actually cost the company? Also here I have firewall details, critical errors, warnings, etc. I have antivirus details, who's got AV, who's missing AV, who's got patches, who's missing patches, and even application and license compliance. Application compliance means what software is installed that I didn't want to be installed. So I can create allowed and disallowed lists in N-central that when someone installs a piece of software that they weren't supposed to, it gets included as part of this report, and also an application compliance report built right in. You can see here I also have data protection. So I'm using backup exec here in my example. I have 39 successful backups, and I have 4 unsuccessful backups. Well, each time I had 4 unsuccessful backups, N-central told me exactly why they're unsuccessful. And of course, I can also trend on the data protection details. Now, I have an overall network reliability, and of course, I can also include things like my SLAs. So here I have an Exchange server. My SLA was 95. I exceeded that with a 96. I have met my SLA. I can of course generate simpler reports that just include this information, like an availability report, but most importantly it's all included as part of my executive summary. What we're going to take a look at next here is my ArcServe D2D. This is a piece of software that I have installed locally on my laptop, and it's a disk-to-disk backup solution at the block level, meaning that it looks for block level changes instead of actual file or folder changes. This will back up from one network resource to another, a Windows device to a shared device, a USB drive, a NAS, etc. Here I have it installed on a laptop, and I'm backing up to actually another Windows server within my network. Now, one of the key features of this ArcServe D2D is the fact that I only have to do one full backup. I never have to do another full backup with this backup solution. It utilizes what's called infinite incremental, meaning that it continuously does incremental backups forever. I have the capability to do over 1,300 unique incremental backups before it takes the oldest incremental and simply merges it into the original full backup. My backups can be as often as every 15 minutes if I want to, and I can choose how many recover points I have. And like I said, I can do over 1,300 if I want to. Now, my backup here can back up, say, my entire machine like I'm doing, or on a per partition basis if I'd like as well. This also includes application backup though. So if you have a SQL Server installed or you have Exchange installed, it will actually back up those instances of the software. And it even truncates the logs for those software. Now this D2D leverages the VSS driver so that it can take consistent snapshots of a machine or incremental backups of a machine as everything is running. It does not need to stop any of the services to take a backup. Now I also have the capability in here to do what's called a bare metal restore. So if I have a catastrophic failure, a hardware failure of some sort, I can go ahead and I can restore my backup onto dissimilar hardware. I have a Dell server fail. Well, there's a built-in boot disk. I can boot up an HP server. It leverages Windows PE as a boot environment, and I can insert my HP drivers and boot the machine as if it was the same machine. Now, I can, when I'm doing a restore, aside from actually doing a bare metal restore, I can also do a file or folder restore. I can search for file or folders at any particular time. So say for example I wanted to grab a file from last Wednesday. I did my incremental on Wednesday, I want to grab that version. I can go ahead and I can go back to that recovery point and grab that file, for example. Of course, I can also search for file or folders. So I can search by name, find them, it's going to tell me the different versions, and I can restore it to the same place, or in fact I can restore it to somewhere else if I want another copy outside of the original. I also have the capability when I'm doing a backup to even store it in a .vhd format. So our backups in a non-compressed are stored in .vhd, which means I can take that backup and boot it into Hyper-V. One of the biggest pain points of doing a backup solution is having to restore. Doing test restores. It takes time, it takes effort. Well, the fact that we store it in a .vhd means you can simply just boot these files. Now if you're using VMware and you're not using Hyper-V, well, you can actually just convert the .vhd into a VMware format and boot it in that format. Now this piece of software, this ArcServe D2D, gets installed on each one of the devices I'm backing up to. And how I install that, I install it on one device, I hit deploy, and I can go ahead and I can add names and IP addresses of where it's going to. If I want to connect to one of those devices, I simply hit the drop down here and I can connect to that device. Or of course, I can use Incentral and connect directly to that device as well. Now this ArcServe D2D will be integrated right within Incentral. So that means similar to my endpoint security or patching, I have the capability to create a profile and I can basically make global changes across all my customers. Whether that means what I'm backing up, partitions, etc. All the monitoring, the reporting, notifications will be all done through Incentral as well. That was Incentral 7.2. If you have any technical questions, please email sales@n-able.com. Thanks a lot.